Hello everybody, this is a brief tutorial about the sociological perspective and the sociological imagination. One of the key questions we ask in sociology is, what do people do? Or why do groups of people do what they do? This is really important for us to think about because people have social rules, structures, or as Durkheim calls it, social facts about how they run their lives. Some people work inside the box, which what we call is familiar, according to Massionis. It's a familiar type of social behavior. Others are outside of the box, what we call strange behavior. But what might be familiar to one and strange about what another person does might reverse itself, that the person who has a strange behavior within one culture is actually familiar within another. So this idea of strange and familiar, of why people do what they do, is a really important starting point for understanding the sociological imagination and sociological perspective. All right, let's move on from there. The sociological perspective is really about ways of seeing the world. A couple of theories here would be what's called microsociology, another one macrosociology, and a third one metasociology. Microsociology is about seeing the small things in life. For instance, if you look at the little forest around here, we'd be interested in how are the leaves changing color as fall is coming on? And how is my garden looking? That's microsociology. The small things in life. How people interact on the subway. How people talk in a restaurant. How people interact as a husband and wife, or a boyfriend or girlfriend, or at a nightclub. Microsociology. Macrosociology is interested in the broader scope of why things are. So, why is it we plant gardens in our neighborhoods? Or, how do the seasons change my neighborhood? Indeed, Park and Burgess in the sociological imagination idea of ecology argues that people really are like trees. They change with the seasons. They have different moods, different times of life they go through. And so we have this idea of microsociology and macrosociology, seeing the small things that people do and seeing the systems and structures that they do. You might have heard some types of terms such as systemic racism or systemic politics or systemic poverty. These are macro-sociological, large views of why things are the way they are. In this course, you're going to be interacting with both the micro and the macro of these things. For instance, you're going to, in stratification, global stratification, encounter a tricky article on sex trafficking, where you're going to have to think of the micro, which is the need for young girls in a certain part of the world to give their bodies to sex trafficking in order to pay for the hunger of their own families. Meanwhile, a system where tourism exists in and around this, and politicians advocate for it because it's good for the broader systemic economy. So we have the small and the big. Another one is what's called meta perspective, which really is about why these things have happened this way. So, why is it in my neighborhood here we have chosen to leave trees here around us? Indeed, there is a building permit problem for some that's called the slope bylaw here in Ossene, New York, Crotonville specifically, where you are not allowed to upset the slope of the Hudson River Valley. So we can't develop the back part of our property the way we'd want to necessarily, because it banks down towards the Hudson River. Now, I like it because it gives me a beautiful sunset view, which maybe I'll tune you into sometime here. But the meta narrative is we have to keep things historically the way they have been here in this neighborhood. Meanwhile, of course, the neighborhood's developed around it. You can see the little playground and the little fence behind us that we just installed this year for, the little grandchild, little James. He's very cute, who's come here and now is starting to walk and slide down the slide. So there is this idea that the small things are happening within the grand history, a meta-narrative of things. So when you're thinking about sociological perspective, we have to think in terms of micro, macro, and meta. Now there's another perspective of importance here. Is how do you view history? Generally, historians view history from written data or from drawings or archives or things that they discover from elite groups that have been in power. So one of the criticisms of sociology of historians is they're seeing it from a top-down view, and so the view of history isn't necessarily an accurate one. It's one that is about those who won. The power of the powerless does not come into the equation. So the story of the elites is a history of written records of the winners. A sociological perspective from below would be, or from what's called the subaltern would be, we view history from the underclass, from the poor, from the enslaved, from the war defeated. And so we have this blend between the two. A good sociologist sees both the historian's perspective, but also recognizes it doesn't tell the whole story. So we have the micro, the macro, the meta, and the historical view. What are some other social theories that are important? You'll read about these in the textbook, but highlight especially Durkheim, Marx, and Weber, three classic sociologists on their view of the world. Durkheim was all about the structural systems. He came up with a term called the social fact. The fact of the matter is, you've heard, is someone behaved this way. So it happened, and that's the structure of society. So structural functionalism of Durkheim is about how the systems and structures operate, and humans have always done this because it helps them to understand the world. Marx was all about inequality and the unfairness. His study was particularly about labor in Britain and the unfairness of child labor and then women labor as far as working in the plants, not having children, and abusing their rights. So from Marxism, we get the fight for inequality of various different forms that have come. So someone who's a conflict theorist, that's the term we give to it now, structural functionalism of Durkheim, conflict theory of Marx, is about where is this unfair. You see this a lot these days, particularly in the rise of new groups of people who have new views of the way the world should work. And so the social idea of equality is one that's always there, and one that has a certain level of legitimate perspective. At other points, it doesn't make sense. So conflict theory is another perspective. And then we have Weber, who is about symbolic interactionism. A symbol is something people might do, look like, say, or an artifact such as they might wear, such as a cross or a shark tooth or a picture of someone on a necklace. Or a symbol might be handshaking or pointing a finger at someone. These are all symbols of language. So we have symbols in our society. Being able to identify symbolic work is really important. Now, in your first assignment you're doing on Z culture, or I would really like you to look at both the video and look at the the Katy Perry music video and the Z culture video. Their common factor there is that Z is the music producer for both, which I found fascinating. but they're speaking to similar worlds but different worlds, but it's loaded with symbols, from dance to dress to choreography to the way people react to the flags you see flying around in the audience. Being able to identify the symbols people have tell us something about their culture. And then it's about interaction or interactionism. You'll pick this up as a major theme and a major part of this course 2 weeks from now. For 2 weeks, you'll be on socialization and social interactionism. But we'll get to that in depth. But the idea is, if we're asking the question what people do and why groups of people do what they do, we have to be interested in how they interact with these symbols. What are the things they do between one another to enliven the situation? So as you look at these videos, think of how people might be hugging, how they might be cheering, how they might be dancing, laughing, and these kind of symbols as they interact with the music and with the crowd that they're in. Finally, in one of your PowerPoints, I go through the looking glass shelf of Cooley. What he argues is everybody has a lens that they see the world through. So if I were to do this, when I do this, I shelter out a lot of else that I want to see. And some people do exactly this. They see the world a certain way. So the looking glass self is all about the way I view the world, though I may not view it as somebody else. You'll notice in the PowerPoint there's various elements of how this works. And so you'll see me highlight, for instance, ageism, prejudice against the seniors. The seniors will view the world one way, the young another. A student has a certain lens that they see the world through that might not agree at all with a business person. And someone who's having poor health would view the world differently than a young child, and so on and so forth. So Cooley's looking glass self is really important for us to try and understand that everybody shelters their world a little bit. How do we summarize this and get to something tangible? Well, I'm going to ask you in your first assignment, do the readings for the first chapter and look at the 2 PowerPoints related to this, and then look at Katy Perry and the Z Culture video and try to view micro-sociology, macro-sociology, put it within a meta-narrative. I'll give you a hint. For instance, it's rooted in Euro fashion and Bollywood in India. It's ultimate transnational music. And both are in this scene. Look for Katy Perry's really allusions to Bollywood-style Indian dance while it's a fashion scene. So the meta-narrative is Europe coming together with India. I know that's complex, but think about it. And then I want you to think about, what are the structures and systems at work here? Is there conflict and inequality, as Marx would say? And what are the symbols and as people interact with one another? And are there certain perspectives they do not have that you might have? And similarly, I would bet you a lot of you have not been fans of Zed and will say, I don't like this music, or I'm not into that scene. That's the point of why I choose it, because it's not an American thing. It's a huge international scene. I'll give you a hint. In Korea, in Europe, coming out of Sweden, and then to France, Paris fashion scene, to India, to Latin American dance, surprisingly. It is fully integrated international life. So, I look forward to your responses in the assignment and in the readings. Make sure you integrate it all together. And I hope this tutorial has helped you to open your view to the sociological imagination and how you would imagine the world to be from a certain perspective. Have a great day.